The stories in this podcast may contain content not suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Oh, welcome. I didn't hear you come in. No, it's no trouble at all. I'm always glad to see you. Please come in. Make yourself comfortable. Have a seat. I happen to have some new strange stories for you here on Madame Strangeways. Dearest strangelings, if you have a true strange story you'd like to hear narrated on the podcast, you can submit it on madamestrangeways.com or email it to madamestrangeways@gmail.com. That's madam with an E at the end, MADAME, a la the French spelling. And if you're enjoying your time here, please share the Strangeway strangeness with a friend, or follow the podcast, or even rate or review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Rating and sharing help guide other spirits and listeners to the podcast. And now, without further ado, on to the strange stories. My Experiences, Part 1, My Childhood Home, by Nicholas Kaminski. My family have always been sensitive to spirits. I thought I might share my more intense experiences through the years, grouped by location. Here's the first, my childhood home. I'm soon to be 34 male now. Back when I was just over a year old, my mother and father moved in with my mother's parents. They had built a second-story apartment on my grandparents' ranch home in New Jersey. My mother still owns the home to this day, and I type this story now while visiting there for Memorial Day. The original house was built in the 1940s as part of a Levittown-style development for GIs. My grandparents bought it in the 1960s when they came here from Germany. As far as any of us knew, no one had died in the house ever. However, from a pretty young age, me and my brother, who is 4 years younger than I, would have odd shared experiences in this house. The most common one was a feeling of being chased up the steps to the second floor. Anytime either of us stood at the bottom of the steps, we both felt inexplicable dread and a presence behind us. But sure, just a feeling, quote unquote, isn't an experience in itself. Tangible things began to happen after my parents divorced and my father moved out of the house. It started when my brother and I were sharing a room with wooden bunk beds. I had the top bunk. Late at night, after my brother would be long asleep, I would hear our computer, a late 90s desktop computer, typing. It would do this every night. I remember at the time not being scared of it, but rather just frustrated with the noise. Occasionally, I would ask whatever was typing to stop, and the sound would cease. One time, my brother and I were playing with our Hot Wheels in the room, and both of us saw a grotesque face appear in the wood grain of the bed. The face was legitimately terrifying, locked in a tormented scream. It appeared for a few seconds, but both of us saw it, yelled for our lives, and ran out of the room. We never could find that face in the wood again, or anything that even could resemble what we saw by making odd shadows against the wood with a flashlight. That was my catalyst for asking my mother to let me have my own room, replacing what was our den. When I moved out of the room, I mentioned to my brother the typing of the computer. He said he had never heard it before, and he didn't believe me. How could something happen in a room he slept in every night without him noticing? I shrugged, and once I was set up in my new room, he took the old top bunk, and our new rooms were complete. The next morning, I found the computer in the living room on the floor. The first night he was alone in the room in the top bunk, he heard the typing. That was enough for him to throw away the computer and never have one in that room again. I would also have a recurring nightmare that only happened at that house. A little girl, malevolent, would find me in the kitchen and laugh before attempting to stab me in the stomach. Later, the dream would include me desperate to find out who she was and why she was in my house. I would wake up in a panic from these nightmares, with the odd sureness that this was connected to the typing, the stairs, and the face in the wood. But who could it be? No one had died there. Eventually, my brother did some sort of pagan cleansing of the home, and the spirit never returned. It wasn't until long after I moved out on my own that I found out my mother had a miscarriage when I was little. She was having a baby girl. I wonder if the spirit of my never-born sister was angry and jealous that my brother and I got to live. The second spirit that gave us experiences in the home was my grandfather. As I mentioned, they lived on the first floor of the home. My grandfather wound up dying after a long battle with Alzheimer's in the house when I was 14. That left my grandmother living by herself downstairs. Generally, there was no activity related to him in the home, except when my grandmother would visit her sisters in Germany. These trips were infrequent, maybe every 3 or so years, but they would be lengthy, 2 or 3 months at a time. While my grandmother was away, boy, did my grandfather's spirit get active. He likely missed her and didn't know where she had gone. My brother and I took piano lessons from the guy Bob who would come over. One day, while my grandmother was away, I needed to stay late after school, so I told my brother to just take a double lesson, as I wouldn't be home in time. When I did get home, Bob and my brother looked terrified and asked if I was just getting in then. Apparently, during the lesson, both Bob and my brother heard a male voice speaking in the other room, as well as footsteps and a door opening and closing. They thought it was me, but indeed they were home alone. Bob was especially shaken by this. Another time when I was around 19, I was home alone and decided to take the opportunity to practice guitar extremely loud without bothering anyone else. I was playing and singing something when I heard clear as day my grandfather's voice, German accent and all, scream my name in admonishment like he used to when my brother and I would misbehave as children. I ran out of the house and drove away in my car, too spooked to even put on shoes. I stayed away until my mom got home from work. I guess I didn't realize my grandfather might not appreciate the loud music. Those were the big experiences that happened at that home, but little things like the piano playing on its own, footsteps in empty rooms, voices down the hallway, and items going missing only to show up in plain sight later were all common. Excited to share more with y'all coming up, including physically violent encounters, full-body apparitions, and a dark entity that turned my skeptic friend a believer. Nicholas, I know that you have a lot of terrifying things in your story, but I have to open with how sweet and creepily romantic it is that your grandpa was super active when he didn't know where your grandma was when she was in Germany. Like, very scary for you and your family, but for me, aw, so sweet. I love how Bob, the piano man, was the most affected by hearing the presence of a man in the house when it was just him and your brother. Your brother's like, "Oh, this is just normal. This is every day. No big deal." But Bob is shook. It would shake me as well. So I understand. I do want to address, it's terrible that your mom lost your baby sister. I think, though, that can't be her. It can't be her that was in your nightmares, chasing you with a knife. It certainly wasn't her trying to scare you. If anything, it's possible, isn't it, that her presence was in the house and was keeping these things like the nightmare and the typing in the middle of the night and the presence chasing you up the stairs. Maybe she was keeping that at bay and doing her best to protect you, and that it might have been worse if she wasn't there. And you might have felt her, but she didn't. I don't think that she would try to scare you and stab you with a knife in your dreams. That's just my 2 cents. But hearing that keyboard typing, especially since you could only hear it from the top bunk, I wonder if that was an actual keyboard typing or if there was something else that you could only hear from up there from the air ducts that maybe sounded like a keyboard. But I understand those 90s keyboards, I think they were mechanical at that point. They were very loud. I personally prefer a loud, clacky keyboard, but I would not want to hear it in the middle of the night when I'm trying to sleep. Though that is nice of whatever it was typing to stop typing when you asked. So good job managing that. And to everyone else, we do have more stories from Nicholas to share in future episodes. So stay tuned. I spent a night at the Chelsea Hotel. Let's talk about it. By Worried Basket 23. It's been a few weeks since I've returned from my trip to New York City, and I think I've finally gathered some of my thoughts about my stay at the legendary and notoriously haunted Chelsea Hotel. Apologies if this is a bit all over the place. Mostly just wanted to share my thoughts and hear others' thoughts. A little background info for you. I've always had a huge fascination with this building and its history, so 5 years ago, while the building was still being remodeled, I dragged along some friends to see the outside of the building. I will never forget the wave of emotion and energy that hit me as I turned the corner and first saw it. I started crying and just felt a great sense of contentment. The following months and even years, I started having these bizarre dreams about the building, despite never having them before. Some were scary, some were just weird. As this isn't what this post is necessarily about, I'll skip detailing those for now unless someone asks. Anyway, Anytime I described that first encounter with the Chelsea, I would explain it as a sort of energy trade-off. I'm not sure exactly what it would be called, but it always seemed like there was some sort of exchange of energy that day. Parts of me were terrified of the building because it felt very dark and heavy. There was another part of me that felt very protected and like it was balanced by the artistic and historical energy there as well. Point being, I ultimately decided that at some point, whenever the opportunity arose, I would spend a night there, no matter the cost. It seemed necessary in my head for whatever reason. The hotel reopened a few years ago, and I saw the cost and gave up at any chance of staying there anytime soon. A few months back, I was planning a trip to New York City for a different occasion and talked with a friend who was equally interested in the hotel's history about the chances of us splitting the cost of a room at the Chelsea. Long story short, it worked out. And before I get into these notes from my actual stay, I would just like to state that after my last experience with the hotel, I was expecting some huge experience and to be a little scared the whole time even. I haven't dove into it much, but there's always been some sort of connection with myself and the spiritual and supernatural. I am very impacted by the energy of places, and I've had a good amount of encounters with spirits in my life. All this to say, there was no huge encounter. There was nothing visually that I saw. I even at times felt a lack of energy, but back to that later. Calling it lackluster wouldn't be fair, but after years of building it up in my head, I felt mostly fine. And sometimes it just happens like that. So on to the things I noticed. I was in a 6th floor balcony room. The room itself felt sort of energetically empty, most of the time anyway. I didn't feel overwhelmed by any specific emotion or energy. It just felt like a fancy hotel room, which is nice, but not what I expected, given its history. As I mentioned earlier, the hotel has undergone significant renovations over the years. Walls torn down, lots of the inside of the building gutted and renovated to fit more of a luxury bohemian hotel of sorts, which as a history buff always kills me a little, seeing the drastic changes in places over time. All of this renovation made me feel like maybe the lack of energy in the rooms themselves came from the renovations, causing the spirits or whatever is there to feel confused and lack a sense of place. Which leads me to the next thing. The hallways and the staircase. While my friend napped, I decided to take the steps from my floor to the rooftop. I really wanted to get a sense of the vibe of each floor and just take it all in. The walls of the stairway are decorated with Chelsea Hotel-related art, some of which I believe is from former and even current residents. So it was at the very least worth a gander. But something I noticed was how full the hall and staircase felt, despite being empty. I really felt more on my toes, and like at any moment I'd be approached by someone behind me. I wondered if the halls and staircase remaining mostly the same as it's always been played a part in this. I think this is when I started to really get a feel for the energy of the hotel, the one I've heard and read so much. It was honestly a little overwhelming. And until typing this, I hadn't made the connection, but now seems like the right time to mention one of the dreams I had involved me walking the halls of the hotel. And for some reason, everyone was sitting outside their rooms, lining the hall and staring at me, almost waiting for me to talk. At the time, this seemed really confusing to me, but as I type this, it seems like the perfect description to what I actually felt. We ended up testing out a spirit box, which resulted in a few interesting interactions. A lot of activity, but much fewer clear words and phrases. One of the clearest things that was said was skin color. Note, friend and I are white, if that is relevant. This was really interesting to me, but I haven't been able to place this into a bigger picture. Other words I could make out at the time included hair pick, my name is, leap, multiple times, and I was wondering if this was connected to a woman who jumped to near death at the hotel. Be nice, Bailey, and bitch, leave. There was a spirit or two that seemed irritated with the contact, and others that seemed to want to talk, but we did take a break after that one. At some point, I heard my name so clearly through the box. My name is extremely uncommon, so this freaked me out. At some point, we poured some wine, and whoever we were speaking to was insistently saying, drink. I think they just wanted to be included in a way, so we made a toast to the former residents and the hotel's history. This seemed to please the spirits. I revised some audio when I got home and found some things we missed at the time. Stuff like listen, believe, etc. Something very clearly said blue, B-L-U-E or B-L-E-W. I heard this at the time and asked to confirm, which was followed by 2 more instances of blue, which I did not hear at the time. As a literature nerd, I was curious if any of my favorite writers were around. Obviously, interacting with dead celebrities is way less common than the average person. However, for what it's worth, when I was talking about writer Herbert Huncke, something came through and said, I'm here, and hello, which I thought was sort of amazing, regardless of who it was. The names Anna, or maybe Hannah, and a possible Emma, although I'm wondering if this was possibly just one woman with one of those names. Anytime I would try to talk to anyone about the Titanic survivors who stayed at the hotel upon docking in New York, there seemed to be an agitated or even angry energy, so I tried to leave that be. There was definitely at least one child present, but I couldn't make out anything specific. Toward the end of our final session in the room, there was a shift in energy that felt negative, which I can deal with. However, this felt beyond that, so I chose to end there. Upon checking out, I tried the spirit box briefly in the lobby, and there was far less activity. I also checked it out at my other hotel later, and there was virtually no activity. I, at some point, ran to the hotel's bathroom after checkout, which is in the basement. The energy down there was similar to what I felt with the dark energy at the end of that session, so I'm thinking this could be connected in some way. I also heard the door to the bathroom open, but no one walked out and no one walked in. This could be explained, though, but worth mentioning. And that's basically it. I'm really curious to hear if anyone can make any sense of this, find connections maybe I haven't, maybe have had their own experiences at the hotel, etc., etc. Sorry for such a long-winded post. Firstly, Worried Basket, I disagree. It wasn't long-winded. It was detailed and fascinating. Secondly, you are far braver than I for staying at the Chelsea Hotel. For anyone who was listening and has maybe not heard of the Chelsea Hotel, otherwise known as Hotel Chelsea, this is not the Cecil or Cecil Hotel where Elisa Lam died. This is a different haunted hotel across the country. So still in the USA. This is in New York City, as the story mentioned. It was built in 1883, and it has seen far more than its fair share of death. Murders, suicides, people setting their rooms on fire. Some of the notable guests who have stayed there throughout the years are Mark Twain, Arthur Miller, Janis Joplin, Patti Smith, Madonna. All of them survived their trip. Who did not survive their visit to the hotel are Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen. Nancy was stabbed to death in 1978, and 4 months later, Sid overdosed and died at the hotel. That's just one tiny sliver, the tip of a death iceberg at the Hotel Chelsea. Like Worried Basket mentioned, Titanic survivors were brought to the Hotel Chelsea after the Titanic sank in 1912. One woman named Mary, supposedly, was staying there waiting for her husband. And when she found out that he had drowned in the Titanic sinking, she took her own life by hanging herself in her room. Now, I mention that because Michael Imperioli of Sopranos and White Lotus fame stayed there in 1996 and has a creepy story of seeing this figure in the hallway when he stayed there. And once he heard that story, he promptly checked out. And I really can't blame him. Can't blame Christopher for this one. So if you're curious about any more of the Hotel Chelsea Hotel's history, it's a fascinating read. I got a lot of good information from the Chelsea Community News site, but there are so many places online, even YouTube channels, that you can go and learn more about this morbidly riveting history of the hotel. Now, for those who are unaware, a spirit box, which Worried Basket used in this story, is a tool used in ghost hunting to find EVPs, otherwise known as electronic voice phenomena, by scanning the AM and FM radio frequencies, looking for ghost voices. So, Worried Basket, if you have any of these recordings, I would absolutely love to share them on the show. So please go ahead and send those over to madamestrangeways@gmail.com. Now, it sounds like you had a very emotional experience visiting the hotel, and maybe it didn't quite live up to your expectations. However, considering the heinous and bloody history of the hotel, I think maybe it's best that nothing else happened while you were there. I know it's a little bit disappointing, but I, for one, am glad that nothing else horrible or scary or potentially dangerous happened to you. If you do decide to go back and try again, if the room rates ever come down, which let's not hold our breath, do send in an update. I'd love to hear it and share it with everyone. Thank you to Nicholas Kaminski and Worried Basket 23 for submitting your strange stories. And thank you so much for stopping by for such a lovely, spooky time. You're always welcome here. It's perfect timing, really. Looks like the rain just stopped. Now, remember, if any of the strangeness scared you, remind yourself that you can feel afraid and not be in danger. You're safe here with me. Until next time. Madame Strangeways is produced and narrated by me, Madame Strangeways. Theme music is by Marina Ryan at marinamakes.co. You can submit your own true strange story at madamestrangeways.com or send in your thoughts or theories on the stories in this episode to madamestrangeways@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.